Yo, what's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome to episode 24 of the Peon podcast. And Mark Buley, part 2. This is the epic finale to the Barley Swine saga. Not really. I'm sure I'll get somebody else for Barley Swine on here at some point. But yeah, we're moving on for now. Yeah. So this is the final Mark Buley episode and the final Barley Swine episode for the foreseeable future. Man, I am burnt the fuck out, dude. I got nothing to talk about. Just because my brain's dead. I just been working so much. Doing too much creative shit. I feel burnt out. I feel numb. But anyway, enough about me. Yeah. This is the final part of Mark Buley's story. Great dude with a great story. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed talking to him. And I hope you enjoyed this whole little suite of episodes. I don't know what's going to happen next. Just going to do some new rounds of interviews and just reach out to some people. We'll see what happens. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I'd like to thank, Mark and Kevin and Alexa for coming on, telling their stories. It was great. It was a fun time. And yeah, it's been a long journey. It feels like just because I release every 2 weeks, it feels like it's been on this train for a while. But yeah, give all of them a follow. If you haven't checked out any of those previous episodes, check those out. Follow Barley Swine. They're doing some cool shit. They're always like, changing things up and trying to be on the cutting edge of Texas fine dining. They don't get enough attention. So, I'd love to turn as many eyeballs onto them as possible. And onto Bryce Gilmore, who's doing some wild shit and having fun doing it. They take the food seriously, but they don't take themselves seriously. So there's definitely a lot of, it's a little bit lighter than most restaurants, I would say. We'll see what else. Yeah, gonna have some new merch samples coming in very soon, so those will be going down. Thank you to people on the Patreon who voted for I had a couple concepts on there, and then some people on the Patreon voted. I appreciate that. So those samples will be coming soon, and then I'll fucking put those up on the... There's no reason for me to cuss there. There's no reason for me to cuss there. That's hilarious. Those will be up on the website soon, yeah. With a whole new collection of Peon merch. Let's see what else. I think that's it. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna keep it real short and let you guys get to the episode. This episode starts immediately where the other episode left off. I hope you guys have been enjoying these little smaller episodes, something a little more digestible. But if you don't, then just message me and tell me to put the whole thing out, and I'll do that too. I'm just a pushover like that. Yeah. Again, thanks to everybody who came on from Barley Swine, and I hope you enjoyed this last episode, and I'll see you in 2 weeks with something completely different. And also, the normal stuff. Just rate it and download the episodes. That really helps a lot. Just share it. Just share it. Just when you're listening to it, just take a little photo with your phone there, and then tag me, Peon magazine in it. It gets around, and it helps a lot more than you realize. And it doesn't take that much effort. So okay, now I'll leave you with that. Enjoy the episode. See you in a couple weeks. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna throw my name in the hat in Aspen and really push for Little Nell. I got a call back from there. I ended up moving out to Aspen to work there. the first day there, I guess it would have been the first week I was in the bistro because the normal seasonal cooks hadn't started back yet. But the first day when the seasonal cooks started back, I met the two guys I was going to be cooking the line with every night, and that was Bryce Gilmore on the meat station and Sam Hellman Mass.
That's amazing.
Who was cooking fish, and they had both worked there the previous season.
Oh wow!
And I was like,
so they had experience.
Yeah, and I was like the new guy, and
Yeah.
so we like prepped our stuff out, and like we became fast friends because we were all so passionate. Like Sam was relatively new to restaurants, but was like a sponge. You know, he had a finance background and had gone to Boston University. And then Bryce is just like born and bred restaurant guy and had worked at some good places on the West Coast. And he was just like unshakable. And just
that's the best description of Bryce I've ever heard.
Oh, and he's like the Iceman, like ice cold, no mistakes. Even back then, his cooking was like that. Yeah. It's like every lamb was perfect that he put up. You know, like all of his meat cookery was just spot on. And it was like to the point where it was like almost annoying.
Yeah.
And then Sam cooked the fish station, so he had like a fish and a chicken pickup, and like endlessly curious, but like it to a point where it was almost like annoying to the exec sous there.
Yeah.
We had a locker room at that hotel to like get ready for service.
Wait, so it's just the three of you?
On the line? It was three of us on the hot section of the line.
Oh, okay.
And then Garmager had like 3 people.
Oh, okay.
And then there was 2 cooks on a bar station, and there was a handful of people in the pastry kitchen. But like the actual entree, hot food on a busy night, like we were the crew. There was alternate crew that like worked the days that we had off, but we typically worked all the busy days together. And I did pasta station, so I was like responsible for producing the pasta and then doing all the pickups during service.
Wow.
So yeah, the 3 of us became fast friends and just like cooked our little hearts out and went and drank beers and got wild in the evenings afterwards. And
yeah, it's a seasonal. Is it a seasonal cooking job? Because Aspen's a seasonal town, right? So
it is.
Like
Yep.
6 months out of the year, it's kind of dead, right?
Yeah, I mean summer's killer and winter is you know the heart of that whole town. So,
yeah.
The shoulder seasons, like the city has since done some things to like sort of pepper in some additional business, but like it did make for some unique opportunities to like fill those down seasons. So like one of the down seasons, I lived and worked on the farm.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was super fun. And one of the other down seasons, I was like right after Bryce left, like I took his former job on the meat station, and he was the kitchen supervisor, so junior sous chef there. So I took the junior sous chef job, and then when the first down season came, after he had left to come back and open Odd Duck as a trailer, Blackberry Farms in Tennessee, which is
I know that farm. I follow him. Yeah. Yeah.
They had opposite off seasons then, so their peak was the spring and the fall. So like the chef of the hotel asked me if I would take like 3 or 4 cooks and go work at Blackberry Farms for 4 months.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so we lived at a house across the road from the property there, and we all cooked in the barn. The barn there's 2 restaurants at Blackberry Farms. Well, there was at the time. I think they might have expanded slightly by now, but there's the main house, which is sort of like more traditional Southern, and a little slightly more casual. And then the barn was their like tasting menu, fine dining restaurant.
Okay.
And so like I cooked the meat station there, and then there is a traditional brigade system with island suites and like you went entremets, and you'd cook your protein and you wouldn't even slice it. You'd send it to the pass, chef would slice it and plate it.
Wow.
So it'd be like I was grilling all the meats, but it was the product is absolutely mind-blowing there that we were working with. And there'd be like an entire speed rack of mushrooms, and it would be like you know, AA matsutakis on there, and there would be porcinis and black trumpets and you know lobster mushrooms, and there'd be 15 wild mushrooms from Foods in Season that we could pick from like on any day.
It's amazing. And that was all coming from the farm?
No, that was coming from Foods in Season on the West Coast, but a lot of the stuff that we were working with on the farm was like they have a couple acre garden there in the center of the property that's like in part a guest amenity. And then also it's like when I was there was a guy named John Cotentil who was running the farm there, or the garden there. And he is known as like one of the celebrities in Southern seed saving. So he's been on like the Mind of a Chef episodes with
Sean Brock.
Yeah, with Sean Brock. You know, just overall clad, like old timer.
Yeah.
Who's saved all of these heirloom seeds.
Is he the guy that brought back like Carolina Gold and stuff like that?
No, that's Alan Benton. Or no, that's Alan Benton's the ham guy. That's I know his name too.
But okay, so there's like a circle of them.
Yeah. But he's in the same level as
those people.
Yep.
Wow, that's amazing.
And we were growing pencil cob corn and grinding that corn for grits on the daily.
Wow.
We were like,
that's amazing.
They had a herd of about 80 sheep, and then they would.
That's cool.
They had a full dairy, and they'd milk the sheep and make sheep's milk cheeses. Mm-hmm. They have one that you can still buy to this day. It's called Singing Brook. It's like brilliant sheep's milk cheese.
Okay.
So cooked there for that off season. Had a phenomenal time cooking there. The chef at the time was a guy named Adam Cook, who's got just a killer restaurant called Topsoil now.
Okay.
And he was nominated for he would have been the nomination crew that leaks sometimes things from the James Beard folks. Was like, Adam, if you stay at Blackberry Farms, like you're getting the Best Chef Southeast nomination next year for sure. But he decided to leave.
Okay.
And then his co-chef of that property ended up getting nominated like the year right after we left.
Okay. That's the point where they're just nominating the restaurant pretty much.
Oh, it's such a notable restaurant.
Yeah.
They were doing such like ambitious work. Like they had, the full larder where they're doing all like the pickling and preserving, and they had like a full-time larder manager. And
wow.
They had USDA inspectors out there because they're shipping a lot of their products. And
so they were like completely everything's above board. Everything's
for sure. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the family that owns that is the Bell family, and all their money comes from Ruby Tuesday. The
restaurant.
They own that, and so they had originally purchased Blackberry Farms as like a corporate retreat, and it grew and grew and grew, and it started as a small farm. And when I had worked there, the property had grown to 9,000 acres.
Wow.
And they had the whole sheep thing. They had hazelnut trees they'd inoculated with truffle spores. They trained truffle hunting dogs there.
That's insane.
It was totally
Just
insane.
from that family?
From that family. And they had at the time the largest private collection of wine in America at 165,000 bottles at that.
I didn't know Ruby Tuesdays was that popular.
I don't know. I don't know how it all worked. I didn't get to stick my head behind the curtain too often, but it was mind blowing. Like Alain Ducasse stayed there a couple times when I was there. Like these absolute juggernaut level celebrity chefs from Europe would come and hang out there, or we'd have.
Sounds like you found the back door. Like everybody's trying to go in the front door with French Laundry, and you found like the back door.
Well, I mean, Blackberry would attract all the same people.
Yeah, right.
And it would be, like the Meadowwood, which is another restaurant that a lot of people knew at the time in Napa.
Yeah.
And it's the same guy who owns Screaming Eagle Cabernet, which is like used to be the most expensive wine, that American produced wine.
Okay.
He owns the Meadowwood, and like that whole group would like co-op a dinner for the Naples wine auction, and it would be like 2 nights at Blackberry Farms, and then
you would be working that.
I got to work the one that was the co-op dinner between the Little Nell Hotel and Blackberry Farms, and it was done at the house of the owner of Blackberry Farms.
That's amazing.
And it was like all those guys were there,
and
totally mind-blowing experience that just like you're like pinching yourself. You're like, wait, what? This guy has 20,000 bottles of wine in his house? What is this?
That's incredible. Yeah. Wow.
And then I spent that season at Blackberry Farms, ended up back at the Little Nell, and I would do like private dinners from time to time, and had done one for a guy named Bruce Berger, and he was like, actually had done it for his friend, and he called me like, the next day, and he's like, I ate at the dinner last night. It was amazing. I want to do a restaurant here in Aspen. I got a building. Let's have a meeting. And I was like 27 or 28 at the time. So I ended up opening a restaurant in Aspen called BB's Kitchen for him.
So Bryce had left and Sam had also left as well? Okay.
Bryce left to come to Austin to do Auduct's Trailer.
Yeah.
Sam went to Chicago to work at Spiaggia.
Wow.
And then I stayed on.
So how long was that period of time? Was that just like a year or so when you guys worked together?
It would have been a couple of years.
Okay.
A couple of years kind of off and on because like off seasons we'd go do stuff and come back.
Of course. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what else all fit in there. But and there was one season where I was the sous chef at like the bistro restaurant in the hotel, which is called Ajax Tavern. It's like right at the base of Aspen Mountain. It's a ski up restaurant. Mm-hmm. Just like enormous volume.
Yeah.
Crazy pace. But a lot of fun to work there, and I learned a lot about like trying to do the best food you could with the fewest steps possible.
Just to save time and
exactly. Yeah, and like a chef that Sam and Bryce and I would all cite is probably the most influential in our career was the executive sous chef of the hotel named Steve Rizikowski. Mm-hmm. He's got restaurants in Boulder and in Denver right now. He has Oak at 14th. Was his first one, and that's like right on Pearl Street in downtown Boulder. And then he had one called Acorn in Denver, and then he has one called Brighter. That's his more casual spot. But anyway, we all worked for him, and he was the one who like passed down that message because I tried to do food that was too complicated early on and was getting just crushed on days that you shouldn't get crushed.
Yeah.
And he would be like, Mark, how many pans does that pick up? And I'd be like, it's 3. Because that was no big deal to have a 3-pan pickup when we were at the fancy restaurant. And he just like shook his head and like hung his head. He's like, and just held up one finger. He's like, 1. He's like, that's how many pans you're allowed to use per pickup in this restaurant. He's like, there's just as much artistry in figuring that out as there is in tweezing your way into a James Beard Award.
Yeah.
And I was like, those
insight.
words weighed heavy for me. So I was just like, all right, figure out how to do nice food without
that limitation is almost more creatively exciting.
It's like here are 4 crayons, like make art. Sort of
exactly. Yeah.
I really I appreciated his stance on that, and I also, like thinking about my upbringing was very much like I want to cook for people who I'd like want to have a beer with. And so I was starting to like gravitate a little bit more towards casual cooking at the time, and that's why like this BB's Kitchen opportunity was so compelling. I was like, I get to open something where I'm the chef there. I get to help design the kitchen. I get to hire all the staff. I get to like put my management degree to work and see if I can do all the finance stuff.
At 27 or 28 or something?
27, I think.
Dang.
So I took that on and then hired a couple of my buddies from culinary school. And it was incredible because it's like, then my buddies from culinary school are like, one of them's working as a sous chef at 11 Madison Park.
Now?
No, he was then.
Oh, he was then. Wow.
He was then. And he was like kind of ready to like get out of there. Mm-hmm. And so it's like,
I can imagine it's pretty exhausting.
At 20, a 27 or 28-year-old chef, I get to hire like a sous chef from 11 Madison Park to help me cook like pretty casual food and very casual food in comparison to EMP. But like, he came and helped me open that restaurant and was, one of the sous chefs there. The other sous chef was doing some chef work at the Marriott Group in Michigan, but we had just always gotten along so well, and his aesthetic really fit the food that we wanted to do. And then the guy that was doing all of the butchery for us had been the butcher at the Little Nell Hotel and was at La Bernardin before that, and like, so we were making
poached a lot of really great people, and
it was incredible because we all had a lot of fun working together and going to school together, and like we knew like we'd push as hard as we possibly could. So we did like some simple but still technique driven food. We're doing salumi from scratch. We're still like putting a lot of technique into the pickups but simplifying them so like we could keep pace. and still like, getting a couple cases of lobsters every week and like breaking them down and making elevated dishes out of all the component parts.
Yeah.
But not to the level of refinement as like Bryce ended up starting with barley at the time.
Yeah.
But it was like a little more traditional, like entree, app, dessert setup for the menu with like a few small plates at the time.
Okay, so it wasn't like tweezer work kind of stuff. It was just like
nice spoon,
Yeah. Okay.
a nice
Yeah.
spoon, but like
Yeah.
thoughtfully prepared.
How was that experience, like running your first restaurant?
It was crazy.
Yeah,
I
can
lost
imagine.
like 35 pounds, and
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
I lived with two of my sous chefs at the
Mhm.
time, and we lived like half a mile from the restaurant. I spent
so your whole
every
life
day
is-
for
yeah.
a long time there. I learned an enormous amount.
Yeah. Did you get to see the business side of that?
I did get to see the business side. The guy who was the general manager there,
Mm-hmm.
he and the owner like really started like button heads quite a bit.
Okay.
And then he was kind of taking some liberties that were like borderline in terms
What
of
do you
like,
mean?
I mean, maybe you shouldn't take bottles of wine home for tasting.
I see. Yeah.
He's like, well, I'm doing the wine list. I got to take this bottle home for tasting.
Yeah.
And that was happening quite a bit. He was pouring whatever he wanted for whoever. He ended up getting wedged out, and then the owner hired a consulting team from Vegas to come in and like sort of shake the place up and to see like, hey, why are we losing money?
Okay.
I mean, they found it pretty quickly.
It was that guy?
Yeah. I mean, that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
But some of what made the place tick financially, and the guy who I opened the restaurant for, Bruce, he came from the New York real estate scene and also had a real estate office in Aspen.
Okay.
And I mean, his son had an MBA from an Ivy League school and would like come and sit in on the meetings, and Bruce was sort of like school of hard knocks, but like tough and smart.
Mm-hmm.
And
So this is like big money we're talking.
Oh,
It's not just like daily
yeah.
like $3,000 covers. We're talking like big money, like buying cases or like a whole cellar of wine and that kind of thing.
Not to that extent, but I mean, his wife was a major art collector, and she had pieces on loan to the MoMA, and
Wow.
like there's like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of art all over the walls there.
Wow.
And like they hired really high-end designers and had a lot of stuff fabricated.
Wow.
It's like what it would cost to do a restaurant in Austin now, in terms of like if you were doing one that was like polished to
upscale design,
could work in any major city level.
Yeah.
Where it's like light fixtures and forks and what kind of table bases and linens and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we ran that place. I was there, I don't know, a year and a half-ish, probably.
Oh, that's I expected longer, I guess. Yeah.
Well, it became apparent that it was going to be a really challenging relationship with ownership.
Oh, after that guy left and things kind of tightened up?
After that guy left and then the consultants came in and...
Did they want you to like compromise food or what
Well,
was
I mean, I had already had to make some changes in the food based on like what the owners wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember when we cooked for the consultants, they sat me down afterwards and they're like, I don't know if you, I mean, we ate all your food and everything is under-seasoned. And I'm like, I know. And they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, I know. And he's like, well, why? What do you mean you know? And I'm like, well, one of the owner's friends comes in here and eats, and every time he gets done eating, he complains that everything is salty, salty, salty. And the owner got sick of hearing that everything was salty.
Yeah.
And was like,
wow.
Essentially had an ultimatum with me that was like, don't put so much salt in the food, and
okay.
His friend would eat there a couple times a week.
Okay. So it was all catering towards his friend.
Towards his friend, and
Wow.
he didn't want to hear that the food was salty at his restaurant. And so I was like, guys, we gotta chill out on the salt. Like all the all of the burger's friends are coming in and they're like saying that the food is salty. I know it's seasoned how like we want it, but the guy, he's the owner. He's not going to let it go. He keeps pushing. He won't drop it.
Wow.
And then they were like,
okay,
so that was an interesting conversation of like, the food is salty. I know. Wait, And then them bringing the owner in and being like, you got to let him season the food. So I was like, there was a victory there, but at the same time, I was like, this relationship might be beyond repair.
Yeah.
So that's going on. In the meantime, Bryce is just absolutely blown up in Austin. He gets nominated for Food and Wine Best New Chefs.
Mm-hmm.
The Food and Wine Festival in...
This is like what, first year of barley kind of thing?
Probably
like
2010, I'm guessing.
Which I think is when it opened, right?
Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah.
He gets nominated for Best New Chef.
Mm-hmm.
The Aspen Food and Wine Classic is where like all the award, like the...
Yeah.
The big show is. And so all of the chefs that get nominated for that are meant to fly to Aspen and put on the events for food and wine to like showcase their skills and rub elbows with the who's who in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So Bryce is back in town, back in Aspen for that, and Sam Helmenmass in the meantime had quit at Spiaggia and ended up helping Bryce open up Barley Swine.
Okay. Did you know at that point that Bryce was like going in that direction, or was he?
Well, when he would talk about like wanting to do a food trailer, and I'm like, you're nuts, dude. I'm like, look at this place. Look at the product that we get to work with. Like,
but he didn't express that it was
I'm
like an elevated food trailer or something.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't understand what food trailers really were because outside of the context of Austin, they like meant nothing to me.
That's true. Yeah.
He was like
a very Austin thing at that time.
It was very Austin, and he was super early in doing like nice food out of a trailer. He was like a pioneer.
Yeah.
And Sam had like gone to work for him in the opening of Barley. And worked for him in the trailer for a little bit too, because he was just like, I don't know what to do next. Like, I don't want to work at Spiaggia. I hate Chicago. And Sam is like driven and dogged and is always going to figure out like a way to do something exciting. And he thought what Bryce was doing was exciting.
Yeah, definitely was.
He gets nominated for that award. They end up in Aspen for the Food and Wine Classic. The three of us reconnect. Like, just...
Were you doing something there as well, or were you just hanging out?
Well, I was just... Aspen's a small town. So it's like a small town, and like there's during Food and Wine, like Batali and his family ate like five times at the restaurant that I'd opened in that week.
Okay.
Like,
that's cool.
The butcher that we had at BB's, his very good friend managed the American Express Black Card. The chef for all of the American Express Black Card events was Thomas Keller. So like Thomas Keller is like 3 sheets to the wind, standing in our dining room looking for my friend's friend because she was hanging out at our restaurant.
Yeah.
And so it's
that's
like
amazing.
The who's who, the variable like who's who is like they're there in Aspen. Anybody like Jose Andres, like, he would come to the hotel when we were all working at the hotel, and they would do an industry night. And it would be like him carving an Iberian ham and scooping caviar up with the ham and shoving it in people's mouths and like just getting wild, taking Perones full of sherry and just dumping them in cooks' mouths and stuff. It was like back in the Wild West days of like the before HR, before PC. It was like that was the Wild West. It's like, and if you were in Aspen during Food and Wine, it was the center of the culinary universe for those few days.
For sure. Wow.
Bryce is back for that. We reconnect, and they're like, "Hey, we're thinking about doing Odd Duck as a brick and mortar restaurant. Do you want to come and help us out?" And I was like sick of what I was doing and who I was working for, and I was like, "Yeah, I do. I'm ready." And so I'd put in my notice with the ownership at BB's and was like, I'm gonna go open a restaurant with my friend in Austin.
Were you following Bryce at that point? Were you like following what was going on at Barley?
I mean, not really.
You weren't really familiar with.
I knew that he had been nominated for Food and Wine.
Okay.
and I knew that Sam was super excited about what he was doing. Like, Sam and I had a much more social friendship. Like, Sam's a talker, and he and I would, like, occasionally, like, hop on a long phone call and just be like, what's going on? What kind of food are you doing? Like, what's the line like there? When he was at Spiaggia, or, oh, you're moving to Austin? Why? Like, oh, what's Bryce doing? What kind of food? And he would tell me about it, and then I would, saw him in Food and Wine, and it's just like, whoa, that's my friend. He's like,
yeah, that's cool.
He's
yeah,
like in
cool.
the one, like the best new chefs, Food and Wine. That's so
amazing.
cool.
Yeah.
So I ended up moving to Austin. We had, after coming to visit and being like, wow, they're doing such cool food at Barley, we had some real estate that we were like, yeah, this is where Odd Duck is going to be. And they'd already started engaging with an architect. That real estate falls through. Bryce is like,
really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So so it wasn't going to be at the current location.
Right. It was going to be, I don't know, a mile south of there. Still on Lamar, but kind of like across from Walgreens on where Barton Skyway cuts across. There's like, a lot that is just now being developed, which is hilarious.
Oh, that one, yeah.
That used to be a mechanic's garage there.
Yeah, and then it
that
became
building,
a pizza
we were
spot.
gonna like gut it and make that into.
Oh, that little corner.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. That would have been a nightmare for you.
Yeah.
No parking, nothing. Like, yeah. Wow. Okay.
But that real estate ended up falling through, so I had to like find something to do in the meantime. And then I went and helped our sort of mutual hero, Steve Rizikowski, with his reopening of his restaurant Oak in Boulder, because his restaurant he'd opened it. It was just raging for like 3 months, and then there was a restaurant fire and it burnt down.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And so it was time for him to reopen. I had really gotten into bread in the meantime, and he's like, I want to do bread at Oak. Will you do a bread program for me and like help me train cooks and reopen?
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And so I like lived in his spare bedroom and like did a bread program for him, and like kind of did sous chef-y like stuff and did pastries for him. At Oak while we waited for the next thing to get to look at for real estate to get down to Austin. We weren't finding anything great, and Bryce was like, why don't you just come to Barley and like cook here while we move to Austin and cook at Barley until we find something. So I did that. Line cooked there for a while, butchered for a while. I had some butchering experience.
Yeah, you were working the grill the first time I went to Barley.
Oh, really?
Me and my friend were sitting there, and we were like watching you work, and you were like, it was like you had like, you were moving so fast, faster than we had ever seen anybody move on a line, and then it was like you had like 6 arms. It was like, how are you doing this? And that place was so small that it was like I can't imagine you moving that much in that small little area. You know what I mean? It was so small. Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. That restaurant was great because it was like this underdog, like punk rock experience that was but it was, we all knew how to play it. It was like a game of pickup basketball. It was like you could just make every station hard and know that nobody there was going to give up and nobody there was going to compromise, and we just like would cook as hard as we could, and that was like the full pirate ship experience. We're like cutting off our chef pants into shorts and like it was the equipment was garbage with the exception of the grill. We had the great wood grill that still exists in the family now. Yeah. But it was done on a shoestring budget, and like we spent all the money on the product. So we were getting phenomenal ingredients, but
that's amazing.
Butchered there for a while.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what was that experience after going through all these kitchens, and then you end up at Barley, which is like, for lack of a better word, like just this ramshackle kind of like pieced together, like you said, like a punk rock pirate ship kind of thing. It
was, but the food was as good as any of the best restaurants, and sure. It had more soul than Bryce. The food that Bryce was doing, even when we were at the Little Nell, if you wanted like a sous chef job at that hotel, you had to go through a formal tasting, and you would do like a 6-course menu, and you would do it for the food and beverage director.
Wow.
The chef of the whole hotel, his executive sous chef, the chef de cuisine of that fancy restaurant.
Wow.
And then generally the GM of the whole hotel would be there. And I remember Bryce's was like mind blowing, because it's like when Fergus Henderson's nose to tail eating came out, and so he was like very into using offcuts. And Bryce was doing some like really cool, like outside of the box, kind of like, in my opinion, I'm like, this is not refined enough for like the white tablecloth and Egyptian cotton chef coat embossed, shiny shoes in the kitchen kind of management team that he's cooking for. But they all loved it because his food was like so delicious and thoughtful.
Yeah, for sure.
That's how he got his junior sous chef role there. Was through that tasting. So I knew that the guy could cook. I knew that he had outside the box ideas. And then when we ended up like cooking together at Barley, or to phrase it more accurately, where I ended up cooking for him at Barley, I was just kind of blown away. And then he like would let Sam and I put dishes on the menu, and our cooking started to look a little bit closer to his, and we were like sort of developing the language together of like, what is the food going to look like at Odd Duck, the brick and mortar restaurant.
Yeah.
And when he and Sam had come to eat at BB's in Aspen, they were like, this restaurant would do really well in Austin. Because it was a little bit more approachable, but it was still like there was craftsmanship in the food. We're still like made all the bread in house. Like we still did a ton of nice butchery, but it was like a little bit more traditional, a little bit more European in flavor profile, less influenced by Mexico and Southwestern cuisine than like the original out the gate stuff was at Barley. Since has become even more of a melting pot just in the years since that. Yeah. Because Bryce, like one of his superpowers is that he like figures out who has a strong voice and the goods to back it up in terms of cooking, and then allows them a forum to express that voice. And like that's like what he was doing for Sam and I, and for Kyle McKinney, the pastry chef at the time, and John West was, one of the sous chefs at the time. We all had like this place that we could pour ourselves into the food, and it would, if it tasted right and the textures were there and it like had a place on the menu, it went on the menu. And it was exhilarating. Actually, a kind of hilarious aside is like when I got hired on as a cook, I didn't realize it, but I was kind of cutting in line in front of some people that were staging there. And one of the people that had been staging there and been just killing himself to get a job there was Bradley Nichols, the Bradley Nicholson of
of Ludi's.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's like, who's this guy coming in here? We're like fast friends now, and we're then at the time. But it's just so interesting to see how that all like weaves together.
Yeah. Did you appreciate going from like running that restaurant to line cooking again? Was that something that you were actively trying to do, or?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sitting in the office coding invoices. That was like
you were cooking on the line, prepping, and involved with the food again.
Yeah. It was like all the athletic components of cooking, where it's like I'm gonna crush my list, make sure everything's as perfect as it can be, and then like make sure that I have time to sharpen my knife before every service. Like there were like the things that when you get like-minded people who all have a growth mindset in a shared space, like they're going to push each other.
Yeah, everybody just sort of keeps elevating, and like you're pushing each other without a toxic like element to it. It's just like you're just trying to do the best, because you see the guy next to you or the lady next to you just like doing something a little better. You're like, I got to be a little better now, It's great. 100%. That restaurant seemed like it always had that. I mean, when I worked there many years later, had that as well,
Yeah. I mean, that speaks volumes to like who Bryce is as a person, and I think like any chef who was a cook for a long time, they try to open a restaurant that's like scratches the itch that they were longing for. That they were like, man, if I would have been able to blank when I was a cook, I would have like been more excited about where I was working. I would have put more of myself into it. I would have grown more as a person. And then each generation just tries to do a little bit better than the previous. And I think like Bryce lives by a code, and I think anybody who's ever known or met him like can sense that he has like
for sure,
very, very strong like internal code of conduct that he holds himself to. And like part of that is to like be the person he wanted in a chef, you know, when he was a cook. And
for sure.
I think that cultivates like a lot of really passionate, thoughtful, hardworking, you know, artist level cooks.
For sure. Yeah, he definitely cultivated like gave people like a very specific perspective, you know, on cooking that a lot of places don't have. You know, it's very it's got a lot of heart to it. Yeah,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, and it strips away all the pretense, and it's about like what is delicious and what's exciting to eat, and what has a sense of place, and what feels like authentic to your own personal journey or identity, and like express that through your cooking, and like that's what he tries to coax out of people.
And also, you don't need it to be this elevated thing. I think that was like the first restaurant I experienced where I was like, they're doing this level of food, and they're all just in shorts and like t-shirts, and everybody's wearing the Jester King shirt, or like, you know what I mean? Like, it looked like me and my friends, and you're doing a like, to my knowledge, like Michelin quality food for just people just like hanging out in a bar, sweating it out, you know?
Well, that was like the era of the gastropub.
Yeah, that's true.
It was like, you know, the sous chefs and chef de cuisines of the places that were getting Michelin stars were like, I'm sick of ironing my chef's jacket. I don't want to put product in my hair every night. Like, I want to wear my holy concert t-shirt and put a bandana on and like turn up like British like punk rock, like 5 decibels too high, and like just sling plates that I know are like bang on good.
Yeah, for sure. How did the opening of Odd Duck end up happening then? If you said it fell out, and then was it just by circumstance that you ended up at that location, which is pretty much like a block from the original?
It's literally on the same piece of property that the trailer was on.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
It was like the developers ended up coming to our broker. We had been working with a broker named Michelle Geary, who she had helped find the spot for barley swine, for the brick and mortar.
Okay.
So oftentimes, like when you're going to open a place, if you're having a hard time finding real estate, you work with a commercial real estate broker who like kind of understands your needs a little bit better and can also market you to the sellers or to the landlord more often. More often, it's a lease situation.
Okay.
And so she knew the developers of the lot that Odd Duck and the associated property at Gibson Flats is all located on, and they were looking for that like keystone business to put on their property. And the way that
was that a restaurant that they were looking for?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And they picked the size.
All right.
You know, they sort of deliver what they call like the vanilla box or the white box, where it's just like this is the amount of square footage that we can build without going through a whole bunch of additional rigmarole. It fits with the overall site plan. Do you want to lease it? So the size and shape of the building were predetermined. We were able to like finish it out however we wanted to finish it out with some tenant improvement allowance, and then with investor monies raised thereafter. But that opportunity came to us through our broker. It seemed like ridiculously serendipitous, the fact that it was literally the lot that the trailer had been bumped off of to make way for this development. And then we end up getting the opportunity to like be the restaurant on that property. Like there's one.
That's amazing.
So yeah, we opened that, and that would have been the end of 2013, beginning of 2014 is when we opened Odd Duck. and we'd kind of like develop the menu all together. Bryce was kind of dividing his time in between barley swine and odd duck. Like I had been brought on as the day-to-day chef for odd duck, working kind of like a chef de cuisine to Bryce as an executive, and Sam as like a co-chef.
Okay.
Sam Hellman-Mess as a co-chef at that time.
Yeah.
And we, just focused on our given strengths and got that restaurant open, and hired a bunch of new cooks. Actually, Zach Perez, the guy who's who is now our culinary director in between Sour Duck and Odd Duck, was one of the first line cooks that we hired there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
What a great hire.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we poured everything that we had into opening that restaurant, and we're super proud of what we opened with.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, what was the plan? Well, I guess the plan wasn't to jump up that much, but the jump from barley to that is huge. I mean, it seems like almost like a hotel restaurant in the sense that you went from what, like 20 seats to like.
Well, I think like 44 was the
whatever.
biggest that barley ever got in that original space. When I started there, it was like 36, and then it was like we were like carving some of the back of the house out to make room for one more table to like have it like actually make sense, and that was like we were worried about that as we were doing it. I think what the appeal of, I'm just guessing from Bryce's perspective of bringing me in, was that the restaurant that I ran in Aspen was, a dining room of about 70 seats with a lounge attached to it that was about 40 more, and then a patio of about 60 more seats beyond that. So, I'd been the chef of, it seems ridiculous, but had been the chef of a place that was like just under 200 seats when it was all said and done, and when we were bumping. Yeah. And like we were doing food from scratch in a small kitchen that was at a nice level.
Yeah.
We were doing food that we were proud of. And he was like, oh, like maybe Mark can help with the volume thing. And I think my experience as the sous chef at that bistro of the hotel also seemed like it would align well. And we just knew the three of us, there was like some kind of magic that would happen when the three of us worked together.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So we're like, let's do this bigger restaurant together. Like, let's make this like the swan song passion project. Yeah. And we poured ourselves into it, and we're very, very happy with how it was developing as a restaurant, like the food we were able to do. Yeah. Gradually, we figured out how to differentiate the food in between barley and odd duck. Yeah. At first, they were very similar.
Yeah, I remember there were some crossovers.
Yeah,
kind of,
exactly.
Yeah. But yeah.
And then gradually, like the real transition was when barley went to like tasting menu only kind of concept. Yeah. And then eventually moved from its location on South Lamar up to the North Burnett location. But that was a couple years later. Yeah. So
what was the thinking behind the kitchen? Because if any other person had that, or any other restaurant group or individuals had that space, they would have maximized seating and minimized how much kitchen. The kitchen is so big. Yeah. It's bigger than the dining room. So like, what was the thinking there? I know that Bryce loves a big kitchen, but I mean, that is like, it's the first thing you see when you walk in, and it's unavoidable. You know what I mean? So what was the process there?
Well, the process there is like, it was driven around two pieces of equipment first. At first, It was like, we're having a wood-burning grill. Because there was a wood-burning grill in the trailer, there's a wood-burning grill at Barley Swine. It's just like quintessential to like Central Texas cooking. It's like, you get post oak, you cook over it. Yeah. And then we were like, let's do a wood-burning oven. And I had like really gotten into bread. Okay. And the bread program that I did for our buddy Steve in Boulder at Oak, I was doing all the baking with residual heat from the wood-burning oven. So I'd come in the morning, sweep out the fire from the night before, mop the deck, kind of even out the temp, and then do all the baking in the wood oven.
Wow. Wait, and just residual heat? Like you're not adding any coals or anything? Just
There's
Wow.
plenty. I mean, there's plenty
amazing.
for
Okay.
2.5 loads. And he had a Forno Bravo, so it was like a modular concrete oven with some insulation.
Okay.
And then there's, in like the super nerdy bread world, there's a guy named Alan Scott who was in California who built these ovens. They were just called Alan Scott ovens, and they
Okay.
had like a lot more thermal mass, and you could bake 4, 5, 6 loads of bread without adding additional fire, because it was like there was so much heat stored in like the thousands of pounds of stone that
Okay.
it was needed to make that oven.
Wow. Okay.
That you could bake really incredible bread
Mhm.
using just residual heat. So like we wanted a wood oven. We happened to find a guy in Central Texas who built Alan Scott style ovens, brick by
cool.
brick.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's Dave Eberhardt and it's Texas Oven Companies. So we engaged him early on, and then we how do we have those two pieces of wood burning equipment like in the absolute center, center of the restaurant?
Yeah.
And how do we make
That's
them
amazing.
like the focal point or like the hearth of the home? That like
Yeah.
we always wanted to give that vibe that we're throwing a dinner party at our house.
It does feel like that.
Like, and that's
Yeah.
and like what's the center of a home? Like in a lot of places, in olden days, so to speak, it was the hearth, it was the fireplace.
Yeah.
So like our version of the fireplace was this wood burning oven, and then like right next to it, we've got this wood burning grill.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're like, oh, we need a place to do prep. And we
Yeah.
started and then we're like, well, we have this many stations at Barley. We should probably have about twice as many at Odd Duck.
and then so the kitchen just balloons.
It just grows and grows and grows. And we loved the sort of chef counter experience. And they're like, oh, we'll just wrap the chef's counter around it and then seat most of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically how it happened, and you're not the first person to notice like the ratios are a little bit off. Like
Yeah.
the architect that we use, he ended up being a financial partner in the business too, and he was like,
That's amazing.
how about we get some more tables in here? Because he drew other restaurants, or he's been an architect on other restaurant projects, and he's like,
Yeah.
we probably need some more tables. We got to do some revenue. But
Yeah.
it all ended up working out, and I think like the patio seating and then the additional seating that we've added out in front of the space is like helped kind of put that a little bit more into balance, but it still is a giant kitchen.
Yeah. Which is amazing. It's a hallmark of that kitchen or that space,
Oh, it's so much, and it's so much fun to know that like the limitations on the food are very, very, very few, because it's like you have the equipment,
So much space.
you have the space, you have like the engagement from the guests to be like, I go here because it's fun. I get to absorb the energy of the kitchen and the bar experience. Like no matter where I'm sitting, except for very few spots on the patio, everybody else can see pretty much everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make that energy a part of the whole experience.
Yeah. So what? How did the sourdough come about? Was that just from your bread making? Like, was that driven by?
Yeah, largely. Yeah, largely. It was driven by the fact that like we always had bread on the menu at Odd Duck, and then we started doing some lamination and doing some croissant work at Odd Duck for the brunches.
Yeah, I remember there was a pig face Parker House roll that I remember to this day because it was so good.
Yeah, that was one of the opening things that we did, and then there was like always like a stuffed pretzel that we would do.
Yeah, I remember that too. Yeah.
And they became like kind of iconic dishes, and we're like, man, people really like the baked stuff that we do. Like maybe we should look at doing a bakery.
Yeah.
And we were at the point where like I think Bryce and his wife had their first kid, and Dylan and his wife had their first kid too. And you get to the point where you're like trying to scratch your own itch of like, where can
does
I
your
go
family
eat with
eat?
my family?
Yeah.
That I'm like excited about eating with my family.
That's true.
It's
Yeah.
like,
it's very few
let's
places.
like make a place that we could go eat with our families.
Yeah.
And we started looking, after we felt like, okay, Odd Duck feels kind of stabilized. We have like a good management team in both the front and the back of the house. Like it feels like we should start looking right now, because we know a restaurant takes about 2 years to bake.
Yeah.
And we started looking and anticipating it was going to take months and months to find a spot. We found a spot the first week. It was literally the first property that we looked at. Is
Yeah.
the property that we opened Sour Duck on.
What was this place?
It was Joe Cook's Catering, and there was like
Okay.
a barber shop here for a while.
Okay.
It was pretty run down, pretty beat
I
up.
was going to say, I don't even remember what it was. It was just a nondescript building, kind of.
Nondescript building. It was a white building with a red awning,
Mhm.
and Joe Cook's Catering was in it. There were like two sort of like Walmart picnic tables in the back with umbrellas over them,
Okay.
and a giant yard.
Mhm.
And then there was an old house on that was like totally decrepit, like condemnable.
Mhm.
And we're like, man, like the property's kind of dumpy, but there's something enchanting about it. And the size was right. Its proximity to downtown was really good. We felt like this neighborhood was really kind of up and coming in terms of foot traffic and economic development. So we signed a lease and started drawing stuff up, and ended up with what we have now in terms of a 2-building structure, one with a bar, a big courtyard in the center, and then your bakery cafe in the front building. And it just kind of slowly grew into
What it is
what it is today.
Yeah.
And did the same thing that all the other restaurants that are still alive today did, and pivoted like crazy during COVID.
Yeah.
And figured out like what does the dining public of 2023 want? Like let's get as close to that as we can.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys are more driven by that. Like, how do we? Which actually is an interesting thing, because so Sour Duck you see as being more like driven by the customer. Like, what do they want? How do we please them? As opposed to, I mean, that's what all restaurants do. But it seems like Barley is more of like chef driven, and people go there for that. And then Odd Duck seems a little more. Actually, I don't really know what Odd Duck is. It's chef driven, but it seems more like.
It has to appeal to a little bit of wider audience too, but
Yeah,
I
it's
think
a little
that
wider
it makes a lot of sense. Like I kind of categorize them in the frequency in which you would eat at the spaces, and then like
That's true, yeah.
What itch are you scratching? Like Barley Swine is like I'm going out for my anniversary. I'm going out to like
very
for a very
special.
special thing. I'm flying to Austin, and I want to eat at like 4 really memorable places, like. Or I want to have a very uniquely Austin experience that's like well curated.
Yeah.
You're like going there to have total freedom from concern, and you want to feel like pampered, taken care of, and you're going for a night of theater.
Yeah.
It's like you go to Odd Duck for like a boisterous atmosphere, really some very chef driven food, an authentic experience, but it's like much more like communal, social, rowdy. That restaurant gets crazy loud.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, in a good way.
In a good way.
I think,
It's bustling, and it's you go there for that energy, that bustling energy,
for
and
sure.
for really good food. And it doesn't feel as formal as the dining experience does at Barley Swine.
Yeah.
And it feels like you have like a wider swath of your peer group that like it makes sense for, versus like very special occasion driven at Barley Swine, or like a more curated group of people. It's like a dinner party at your house is like Barley Swine. It's like a yard party, is like Odd Duck, and then a block party is Sour Duck.
Yeah.
So it's like Sour Duck's like you could eat here multiple times a week. You can plug in your laptop and do your work here. Like you would never do that at Barley Swine.
Yeah.
You would
Or
never do
come
that
grab
at
Happy-
Odd Duck.
No.
Yeah. It's like
yeah.
you could come here for a cup of coffee and a pastry and leave. And I think the casual nature of it and the amount of times we're expecting the guests to repeat, like very much drives the decision making of like it's got to feel comfortable for a lot of people, and we have to react to what the community is saying.
Yeah.
And that's
For
kind of
sure.
what we wanted us to be from go at Sour, was the a community house, or a public house that offered food, drink, hospitality, but did so in a totally like stripped down and easy way.
Yeah.
But that the quality and craftsmanship was still there, and was
it still has there's still like you can see there's like sibling blood. You know what I mean? It feels like the same.
Yeah, and I think like the craft of cooking and the craft of making cocktails or pouring a nice shot of espresso, they're all coming from the same place. It's coming from like we care deeply about the things that we do, and it's like which of these things scales well to the point that we can scale it to, on our busiest days here, it's 1,000 people.
Wow,
and it's like
that's a lot.
It's like how can we cook for 1,000 people and still have it feel like we care about all of them? And it's like okay, like we bake the bread here, like we smoke the meats in a big smoker. Like it's still farmers market curated, not quite to the extent that it is at either Odd Duck or Barley Swine, but it's like driven by seasonal markets. We work with farmers that are on a slightly larger scope, or like more farm to table, the distributor driven than it is individual curated farms. Whereas the other restaurants are more like curated farms.
Yeah. I think it's. If you look at other restaurant groups, it's wild to see that a lot of restaurant groups strive for that sort of distinction between the restaurants, and I feel like you guys made it happen quite naturally. It's nice to see. I don't know. I feel like you have to experience it to understand, but it does feel very distinct between each place.
Yeah, and I think
like you can go to each one in one day if you wanted. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Breakfast here, lunch at Odd Duck, and then dinner at Barley.
Yeah.
It seems possible.
Yeah.
It's wild.
I think a lot of that was organic, and a lot of that was just sort of like, as a cook, you look at everything that's done in the food world, and you're like, I kind of want to do all of it.
Yeah, that's true.
And you
got ideas,
and they don't necessarily fit, right? It's like
they don't.
It's like a croissant, a chocolate croissant wouldn't really like. It would feel kind of weird to serve at Barley Swine. Be like, here's your chocolate croissant, or
it wouldn't fit.
Or here's your fried chicken sandwich. I'm like, but like, show me a cook who's not a vegetarian who doesn't love a fried chicken sandwich. And it's like,
all right.
It's we're scratching our own itches, and it's figuring out a way to do as much of what we really wanted to do as we can, and then like putting it in the right box. Is what just sort of organically happened. Yeah.
Well, as a sort of like a last question, what do you guys got planned for the future? Do you guys just keep plugging away, or?
I think I put it this way the other day to one of our managers: is we sort of like our growth is oriented towards kind of reading the tea leaves. We'll look at our management team, much like Bryce would do when he would see a new cook that had a lot of promise. He'd be like, what does this cook want to do? And like, how are they going to contribute? It's like, we'll look at the overall management group. We'll look at the folks that we have here, like what the hiring market is. And we'll be like, what feels like a logical, natural next step? And like, we're in a looking phase right now. Like Bryce recently like bought a farm. Yeah. He's got Riverfield Farms and farm, I should say, singular. And he's doing what we do, and slowly, organically, without forcing it, figuring out how that works with the whole group, how to get the best of both worlds in both directions, with the farm to the restaurant and the restaurant to the farm relationships. And I think like the next thing will reveal itself
just organically. Yeah That's awesome.
We also kind of grow when it in that same approach, you grow when it feels right for the team, and when it feels like all the right pieces are in place, and those pieces are like, hey, like I like working with you guys, but I can't work in the same job for 10 years. So it's like, there's that internal pressure as well. Internal meaning inside the restaurant group. Otherwise, what's next is the prep list for tomorrow.
Take a day at a time, right? Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Mark. Thank you very much.
This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.